Apologies for the abrupt stopping. Always happens like this online. So, hoping that we feel gathered by this chant, which actually seems like divine, like the voice and the recording, it doesn't seem human. I don't know. Like, I'm so grateful for such voices and chants. So, yeah. So, may the divine manifest in me. So Om Namo Bhagavate, followed by Mother and Sri Aurobindo's name. So just for that, with the same aspiration, we'll begin our book study of Looking from Within, which is also this is our aspiration that when we read these words, they don't just remain words. We are able to change our practical lives so that the change is visible to us more than anybody else, so that we can be lighter and we can spread more light. Yeah, thank you. So we were on number 6, chapter 2, section 6, and it's a very interesting one. The title is Sin, a Thing Not in Its Right Place. In Harmony Circle also, we had covered the topic sin for a couple of weeks. It was really interesting. And I remember Yogananda Paramhansa, I think. No, I think Vivekananda. There was a quote that said that there is nothing called sin. It's just error, and which we can classify into anything. I'll see if I can find that quote. So if anybody is willing, they can read at least this first part in italics, and then we can take up the next thing.
To hate the sinner is the worst sin, for it's hating God. Yet he who commits it glories it. Yet he who commits it glories in his superior virtue. I will read it again. To hate the sinner is the worst sin, for it is hating God. Yet he commits it glories in his superior virtue. Sri Aurobindo, Thoughts and Aphorisms. When we enter into a certain state of consciousness, we see clearly that we are capable of anything and that in fact there is not a single sin that is not potentially our sin. Is this impression correct? And yet we revolt against and feel an aversion for certain things. There is always something somewhere which we cannot accept. Why? What is the true attitude? The effective attitude in face of evil.
Yes, thank you. So we'll just read these again and then we'll see what Mother has to say, I'm assuming, on this. So any reflections are welcome, and the section's title is Sin, a Thing Not in Its Right Place. So that's it's like he's defining it. So sin is something which is not in its right place. So we'll take the first small one that we read. To hate the sinner is the worst sin, for it is hating God. Yet who commits it glories in his superior virtue. So the one who commits this thing, that he's hating the sinner, he feels, oh my God, I'm so superior, right? Like I can see it, I can catch it, and look at that one who's still doing it. So to hate the sinner is the worst sin, is what Sri Aurobindo is saying. So what the person might be doing, and the sin could be really bad, and yet Again, how they say it so strongly, and it's like for everything. It's not mostly, it's not most certainly. It's a fact. It's a statement, all encompassing. No matter what anybody has done, if I'm hating the sinner, that's the worst sins, which is a bigger sin than that sinner would have committed. For it is hating God, yet he who commits it glories in his superior virtue. It's reminding me of that, of a video that we had shared of Thai, in which he was speaking about, how a pirate had done horrendous things and how Thai was able to forgive him and go in his shoes and see what his background was, his upbringing was, and suddenly he could understand why he would do what he did. Ritu might remember it. I remember discussing it with her. We had
Yeah.
shared it on the group. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, we have shared it 2-3 times.
Okay, okay. Good to know. Yeah. So if there's anything on this, I think it's very clear. There's nothing much to be said on this. And yet, a lot of times, I want to say most of the times, we read these things, and after 5 minutes, the judgment is still standing strong, or after 2 minutes. Good, bad, evil, whatever, how we keep in this duality, the wheels of dualities, we always just keep judging and classifying and rating and, okay, I did bad, but he did worse. Hello, I I remember that I had a friend whose father was in charge of cleaning a river. And I remember his mother sharing with us, very proudly with my parents that, there are other people in his department. If they get like 100, they keep 90 and they just spend 10 on the actual work. But we keep 50 and we spend 50. See how great, or how magnanimous is that. So I was so shocked, but yeah, that's how, how everything is relative. So it's pretty amazing that that can be something to be proud of, and yet we are. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we can go to the next one. We don't have to sit on it. Yeah, all I was saying was that it would be so great that if we can remember these, so that the next time I'm indulging in it, something can tell me that this is, I don't need to go there, I don't want to go there. Let me focus on myself, so that slowly, gradually, or with grace, immediately, I can stop. Okay. So this was from Sri Aurobindo, Thoughts and Aphorisms. So now we'll just go through this and then we'll take up the next passage. So here it says that when we enter into a certain state of consciousness, I think maybe this is somebody's question now. When we enter into a certain state of consciousness, we see clearly that we are capable of anything, and that in fact there is not a single sin that is not potentially our sin. Would anybody like to elaborate on this? What, how do they conceive this? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So it's just that, because I have a limited background, I have restricted knowledge, I have certain experiences, and based on those experiences and knowledge, I have formed notions of right, wrong, good, evil, like we were discussing. So here it is said that if I were in somebody's shoes, it has happened to me a lot of times that I feel that somebody, I don't know, either too this or too that, or too insecure or too whatever demanding. But when I was in their place, I felt I was reacting the same way or worse. And I have now seen a pattern that if ever something random comes to me like this, when there is some judgment in me, something that, oh, this is going overboard or this is just too much, a random comment, very soon, within a day or two, something happens. I'm in a similar situation and I look at myself and I'm like, oh my God. So this was right. I've learned my lesson. I don't need to do this anymore. So when we enter into a certain state of consciousness, we see clearly that we are capable of anything. And that, in fact, there is not a single sin that is not potentially our sin. That given that situation, given that circumstance, given that temperament, it's not possible that I would not do that. Almost not possible. So, is this impression correct? And yet, we revolt against and feel an aversion for certain things. That is absolutely intolerable, unacceptable. I can't handle this. So, there is always something somewhere which we cannot accept. Why? What is the true attitude, the effective attitude in face of evil? So, this is a question. And I thought it was again some sharing, but it is a simple question, not a simple, a very good one.
So my interpretation of this is, correct me if I'm wrong, um, but also sometimes we are sitting on this high horse and our circumstances are so comfortable. And, we get together and we say, oh, that person robbed, the company of so much money, or maybe somebody, a petty thief robbed, or, somebody else did something wrong. But we also not giving excuses for such behavior, but we don't know if our circumstances were different, how we would have reacted to in the face of poverty, in the face of hunger, in the face of so many other things like infidelity or anything, like a murder taking place or something. We don't know the other person's circumstances, and we are so quick to judge, and not at any point condoning any of these crimes or anything. But sometimes I think we speak from where we are, right? So we also have to sometimes open our eyes and look around. The world is different. Everybody has a different relationship with somebody, um, a different situation, economic situation. So the pressures are different. And sometimes maybe if we were in their shoes, we would have probably reacted even worse. So for me, it's about get down from your high horse and see what life is really about.
And I think one thing just to add on to this is I don't accept or even see that I am sitting on a high horse when I am doing it. It feels almost virtuous that see, I can see wrong from right. So here it is being said that we are capable of anything. And that, in fact, there is not a single sin that is not potentially our sin. So it's not that we might act that way. It's almost a certainty, right? Like I would want to even remove the word almost when we read this here. But yeah, let's see what would be further said on this. But on the same lines, I remember, how in general, how it's considered that, say, for example, India is a poor country. There are a lot of thefts, there are a lot of thieves, there are a lot of loot that takes place there, and that's so sad. And it's just whatever, they're not educated, and that's why they do it. So the first time I saw, and I was in US, and there was this coverage of, I think, Hurricane Katrina it was, or maybe something else, Helen, or I don't know the name. But then they showed videos of cities where it was supposed to hit, and how people were just, they had broken into those warehouses, not warehouses, sorry, those say Walmarts and all, and they were stealing things because either it was closed or I don't know for what reason. During Corona times, I remember how people were just like how they were asking everybody. Again, a US footage I had seen that they were requesting everybody to take, say, single packets, huge packets of, say, toilet paper, water, beer. And yet people were fighting and actually physically fighting and all to grab that extra piece and stuff. So it's all about demand supply. It's all about situations. When we are in an extreme situation, we do that. It doesn't, I'm not saying it's justified, but I'm saying that the same person who would have criticized, let's say, poor Asians or poor uneducated Indians, for example, would be standing there, could be standing there fighting for that last piece of toilet paper. So it was very shocking for me, and it was quite interesting also that how, when the times throw something at you, when it comes to survival and comfort, how I react. Yeah. Ritu, did you unmute? I don't know. I have a feeling I saw you unmute, but then you didn't unmute later.
Yeah, yeah. So I was just trying to. You remember once you had shared in that movie Munna Bhai MBBS, there was this guy who was stealing something, and then everybody tries to attack him and catch him and hit him, and then somebody comes up and asks that who, if there's somebody who's never stolen anything, that person should raise their hand. So that's what I was reminded of, that there is not a single sin that is not our sin.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I remember. Yeah. Okay, so if anybody is willing, they can read, I think, the first paragraph, maybe till here, till anything. So let's see what I am assuming it's mother now who's answering this. Wow, it's a big one. The mother. It looked like her. Yeah, so please.
Yeah, Daru, I'll do it. Yeah. There is not a single sin that is not our sin. You have this experience when, for some reason or other, depending on the case, you come into contact with the universal state of consciousness, not in its limitless essence, but on any level of matter. There is an atomic consciousness, there is a purely material consciousness, and there is even more a general psychological consciousness. When by going within, by a kind of withdrawal from the ego, you can come into contact with the zone of consciousness, let us say a terrestrial or collective human psychological zone. There is a difference. Collective human is restrictive, whereas terrestrial includes many animal movements, even plant movements. But as in the present case, the moral notion of guilt, sin, evil belongs exclusively to the human consciousness. We will say simply the collective human psychological consciousness. When you come into contact with that through this identification, naturally you feel or see or know that you are capable of any human movement here. It is to some extent a truth consciousness, the egoistic. Yeah, thank you. The egoistic sense of what belongs and does not belong to you, of what you can do and cannot do, disappears at that time. You become aware that the fundamental structure of the human consciousness is such that any human being is capable of doing anything at all. And Since you are in the truth consciousness, at the same time, you have the feeling that judgments or aversions or rejection or absurd. Everything is potentially there. And if certain currents of force, which you usually cannot trace, you see them come and go, but as a rule, their origin and direction are unknown. If any one of these if these currents enters into you, it can make you do anything. It could, if you could always
So
remain in
should
the
we
state of,
pause here, Adaji? It's a very big one. Maybe we can take one
yeah,
paragraph. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Already this is too big.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So if there's any reflection, you can please share. Otherwise, we'll take it up line by line. Okay. So Mother says that this is a repetition that there is not a single sin that is not our sin. I think good to hear this again and again. Oh, I had done it right. You have this experience. So when do you experience this? That a single sin that is not there, that is not our sin, is when for some reason or other, depending on the case, you come into contact with the universal state of consciousness, not in its limitless essence, but on any level of matter. So there's something called a universal state of consciousness, right? They usually, you know how it's said that actually consciousness is one, right? So for some reason, if you come in contact with the universal state of consciousness, not in, like I am Brahm and Aham Brahmasmi, not in its limitless essence, but the level of matter, it's very interesting. I've never seen it put like this. So there is an atomic consciousness of maybe atoms, that's what it's referring to. I could be wrong. There is purely material consciousness, and there is even more a general psychological consciousness. So atomic, material, and psychological. It's very interesting because I would have thought that atomic and material are the same almost, but let's see. So when by going within, by a kind of withdrawal from the ego, you come into contact with this zone of consciousness. So let us say a terrestrial or collective human psychological zone. That, how in one culture, in some space, in some territory, how there is something similar, how people think similarly. Let us say a terrestrial, collective, or human psychological zone, there is a difference. Collective human is restrictive, whereas terrestrial includes animal and plant movements. So, collective human is always obviously would just mean human, right? Say, for example, say if you are in the Las Vegas Strip, you are thinking about casinos, you're thinking about making money, you're thinking about, I don't know, there's lust, there is greed, because that is the nature of the land. That is where what people go to do there. And yet, terrestrial, they are saying, is more inclusive. It's not just human, it would be animal as well as even could be plant movements. But as in the present case, the moral notion of guilt. So we are just because we're talking about sin, right? So she says that when we're talking about guilt, sin, evil, it belongs exclusively to the human consciousness. Plants or animals, they don't feel guilt, sin, or evil. So we will say simply the collective human psychological consciousness, when you come into contact with that through this identification, naturally you feel or see or know that you are capable of any human movement anywhere. So we have just usually heard this, right? That that's not a single sin, that's not a sin. We would have heard different aphorisms. But Mother is sharing how do you actually realize this? Like, how do you know? So she's saying when we are able to come and get in touch with that consciousness at the material level, it could be psychological, terrestrial, atomic, then you realize that when you are able to see that you are capable of any human movement anywhere. So, for example, what was coming to me is, say, if there is fire, I, being a human, will get burned. That's my material that I am made of. So similarly, when say, how they say show that how that love arrow, how I don't know what god he is called, Cupid or the love god, when he hits the arrow, you don't have a choice. It just happens. Usually we are very weak and we just come to desires and temptations and greed. So I think that's what it is referring to, or we'll see when we move further if it's something else. You become aware that the fundamental structure, I'm sorry, where were we? Anyway, yeah, sorry. So it is to some extent a truth consciousness, this egoistic sense of what belongs and does not belong to you, of what you can do and cannot do, disappears at that time. You become aware that the fundamental structure of the human consciousness is such that any human being is capable of doing anything at all. That you just have to be at the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time, and you would be fully capable of doing anything. This awareness fully dawns on you that this is how it is. We are made that way. And since you are in a truth consciousness, at the same time, you have the feeling that judgments or aversions or rejection are absurd. So right now, how Deepa was saying that we sit on a high horse and we are doing it. But when we are capable of seeing that I am capable of anything, falling down to any level, and we have experienced this, I don't think any of us have not experienced this in our relationships, how we, I don't know what we become, especially when we are in, under the influence or something, or for our expectations or whatever. So then we realize that these judgment or aversions or rejections are absurd. Everything is potentially there. And if certain current or force which you usually cannot trace, you see them come and go. But as a rule, their origin and direction are unknown. If any or one of these currents enter into you, it can make you do anything. If you've ever seen, I know I've seen it a couple of times, like prisoners, sharing, like people are interviewing them and they were like, why did you do it? How did this happen? And a lot of times I've heard in those interviews, not a lot, I haven't seen much, I don't know why I said a lot, that the person says that I have no idea what happened. I don't know, I just got angry and I did it in a rage, or there was a force that overtook me and I ended up doing that. So it's really amazing how we are really puppets and anything can be done through us anytime. Yeah, I don't know. I think I spoke too fast. I have no reason why. But if there's any confusion, we can take it up. And obviously, reflections are welcome before we move forward. So I don't know if I should keep it here or there, if there's anything. Okay. So maybe we can go further. So we can take the next passage, next paragraph. If anybody is willing, they can read. Otherwise, I read starting from if you could.
I'll read. My phone is acting up. Okay. If you could always remain in this state of consciousness after some time, provided you maintained within you the flame of Agni, the flame of purification and progress, you would be able not only to prevent these movements from taking an active form in you and expressing themselves materially, but also to act on the very nature of the movement and transform it. But of course, unless you've attained a very high degree of realization, it will be practically impossible to maintain this state of consciousness for long. Almost immediately, you fall back into the egoistic consciousness of the separate self, and then all the difficulties come back: the disgust, the revolt against certain things, the horror they arouse in you, etc. It is probable, it is even certain, that until you are yourself completely transformed, these movements of disgust and revolt are needed so that you can do in yourself what has to be done to shut the door. For after all, the problem is not to allow them to manifest themselves. In another aphorism, Sri Aurobindo says, I no longer remember his exact words, that sin is merely something which is not in its right place. In this perpetual becoming, nothing ever repeats itself, and there are things that disappear, so to speak, into the past. And when their disappearance becomes necessary, these things become, for our very limited consciousness, bad and repulsive.
Yeah, should we stop here? I think we can.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, taking it from if you could, so Mother says, if you could always remain in this state of consciousness, and what consciousness were we talking about? That when we realize that everything is possibly, potentially there, and anything can enter you and make you do anything. After some time, provided you maintained within you the flame of Agni. So, after this realization that anything is possible, and if you have this flame of purification and progress, you would be able not only to prevent these movements from taking an active form in you and expressing themselves materially, but also to act on the very nature of movement and transform it. I think it's pretty amazing that not only does one have the capacity to prevent the force from acting on you, but I don't know, if you are more realized, you can actually change the nature of movement. You can actually transform it. That hatred is thrown at you and you transform it into love, for example. So this seems pretty amazing that that's also a capacity, a capability. But Mother says, but of course, unless you have attained a very high degree of realization, it will be practically impossible to maintain this state of consciousness for long. You know how we touch places and then we come back. We touch places and we come back. So you might be able to do it in some moment for some things, and again it escapes you. So almost immediately, she says, you fall back into the egoistic consciousness of the separate self. So if you are there as a separate self, you will not be able to, of course, then do this transformation. You have to be able to, I think, touch that consciousness, that oneness probably that she was referring to before. So going further, and then all the difficulties come back, the disgust, the revolt against certain things, and the horrors they arouse in you, etc. it is probable, it is even certain that until you are yourself completely transformed, these movements of disgust and revolt are needed so that you can do in yourself what has to be done to shut the door. It's really interesting, right? Like how we see one thing and we say, oh, it's absolutely not needed and where it takes me, and yet everything has its place. So, till we are open, Mother is saying that these are needed even so that you have that thing between right and wrong so that you don't fall for it. But again, in that case, again, hating the sinner won't be the right thing, but we can at least be fully aware of the sin, right? So it's probable, it is even certain that until you are yourself completely transformed, these movements of disgust and revolt are needed so that you can do in yourself what has to be done to shut the door. For after all, the problem is not to allow them to manifest themselves. So if the door is open, they will manifest more easily. The mother follows this by saying that in another aphorism, Sri Aurobindo says, she does not remember his exact words, that sin is merely something which is not in its right place. So this is what we read, right? The first aphorism was this, that sin, a thing not in its right place. So everything has a place, but if it's not, something is not done with the right center, with the right spirit, that could become or be called a sin. So she says that the sin is merely something which is not in its right place. In this perpetual becoming, nothing ever repeats itself, and there are things that disappear, so to speak, into the past. And when the disappearance become necessary, these things become, for our very limited consciousness, bad and repulsive. I think let's read it again. It wasn't very clear. In this perpetual becoming, nothing ever repeats itself, and there are things that disappear, so to speak, into the past. And when their disappearance become necessary, these things become for our very limited consciousness bad and repulsive, and we revolt against them because their time is over. So what I can perceive from this is that how, we are growing or we are reaching different places, and I could have done something, but now I have evolved and I don't do it. It's a thing of the past, and now it's no more in me. So when something is no more in me, it has disappeared. So for a very limited consciousness, it becomes bad and repulsive. Because I cannot see the totality. I cannot see that I too have been there. I too have stepped in the same water. Because it has disappeared for me into the past, these things become for a very limited consciousness bad and repulsive, and we revolt against them because their time is over. But if we had the overall view, if we could contain within ourselves the past, the present, and the future all at once, as it is somewhere above, we would see the relativity of these things, and that it is above all the progressive force of evolution that gives us the will to reject, and that whatever they are in their right, wherever they are in their right place, they are quite acceptable. So if something seems like a sin to me, given the right consciousness, if we are able to see how things are evolving, I would be able to see that actually, if I look at things in the bigger picture, everything is in their right place. I mean, there was a right place for everything, but of course, it could be at the wrong place, and then it can be turned as sin. But there is a possibility that if I get that view, I would be able to see this. So it's a bit, words are a little bit here and there and not totally in front. So if there's any confusion or concern or reflection, they are welcome. So I'll just finish this paragraph, that only it is practically impossible to have this experience unless you have the total vision. That is to say, the vision that belongs to the Supreme alone. So if you reach that consciousness, then only you can see that. So I think for us, we can just listen and just nod our heads and we can say, oh, it must be like that. Because for us right now, for most of us, this would not be a place we have reached that we are able to see past, present, and future at the same time, or reach that consciousness. So, therefore, you must first of all identify yourself with the Supreme. Then, afterwards, with this identification, you can return to a sufficiently exteriorized consciousness and see things as they are. So first you can relate and then you can go back to the exterior consciousness. But this is the principle. And to the extent that you're capable of realizing it, you reach a state of consciousness where you can look at everything with a smile of total certitude that everything is as it should be. I think this is something that we can relate to much more easily. That because it is being said that you have to reach a certain level of consciousness, identify with the supreme consciousness to be able to actually practically experience this and see how everything is right and things have their place. But till I'm not there, the least I can do, or I can aspire at least for this, that we can look at everything with a smile of total certitude. So the head is bowed down and say that everything is as it should be. So we are not talking about, just accepting everything or bowing our head down to each and every command that is given to us by here and there. But we are talking about bigger things. We are talking about how, again, how we are judging or we are classifying sin and everything. So till we cannot do anything about it, we can just say that it is as it should be, and there's growth and there's progress for that person in that as well. So anything on this? I know it's a bit here and there, at least because we're talking about things that are very difficult to practically experience. So I would like to ask you, although there is time, but does this feel enough, or should we take this whole passage? There's 2 more paragraphs. I am fine either ways. But I don't know if it's getting too much. I hope both of you have not slept. Okay. So I guess we'll take at least 1 more paragraph. So if anybody can.
No, we haven't slept, huh?
Okay. Good one.
I was just wondering. Yeah, we can take 1 more paragraph maybe.
हाँ, within 2 तो ये खत्म ही हो जाएगा. So we'll just
Okay.
see how that is. Yeah. Ritu, would you like to read?
Yeah. So Taru, last session which we did, that was on being with the truth. I mean, that sometimes we have to stand and fight and be aggressive.
It was something about defects, dealing with others, right?
Yeah. So, so here it says that one should not hate the sinner. So it's
Hmm.
basically like one should stand against the sin and not hate the sinner. Because sometimes, it feels when we read these, it feels that जो भी हो रहा है ठीक है, whatever is happening is okay. I mean, it's supposed to happen. It's this time to happen. That's how it is. Maybe um, that's how it has to turn out. And sometimes when we read, it says that stand against things and fight, and anger is also good. Where you see something wrong, fight for it. But then there's another side of it which says that we don't even know what's the truth, because at one point of time our truth is different from what we were thinking 10 years back, and maybe the other person's truth is different from our truth. And here it says about sin. So sometimes, I mean, I'm sure all of it must be correct in different situations and in different um, places. But sometimes it gets confusing as to what to do, because sometimes, when you're in a situation and it feels that, oh, you should fight for it, and then one thinks that, okay, that person also would have a reason for it, so why fight for it? I'm sure I'll figure it out, or I'll understand it at some point, that what that person wanted. But then the last session was to actually stand up and fight for the truth. So sometimes it's a little confusing.
Yeah, you're right. It is confusing. And like you said, a lot of times, we do get a clarity when we are in a situation what to do. And depending on where we are, we take our stand, right? So, a lot of times I remember even Acharyaji used to say that we try to make a lot of sense of things because we know that we believe that with our intellect we'll understand, and then at the right time we'll take out the right armor and we'll use the right instruments and weapons. But he said that that's not the case. Most of the things he actually used to use the word always, that what I'm saying, and it will sound very contradictory to you, so I'm apprehensive in saying. He said, don't try to understand what I'm saying, just listen. And when the thing is needed, whatever thing is needed, you can trust me, he said, that the right thing will come to you and you'll act in that right thing. But for that, one needs to be a
Mhm.
bit centered, right? One needs to have a bit of faith and then you are directed. But because we are mental beings, right? We believe that everything has to be dictated with the mind. But that's not the case. But obviously, till we are there, we'll use reason, right? That you are saying that we'll have to see, judge, discern, and all. But most of the times, when the situation comes, we know that, okay, here I have to speak, here I can be quiet. But just knowing these things, they expand us a little bit more. Maybe we'll just see the crow do something on your head. That would be funny. So, yeah, I don't know
I
if
think
that, yeah.
I think it's in a way, I mean, simplistically put, like for example, in Canada in the fall weather, um, generally the impression is okay, you wear if it's cold, you wear winter, sweaters, and if it's warm, you wear accordingly clothes. But sometimes circumstances just change during the season itself. So you adapt, right? You adapt based on not because it's winter, I am going to wear my sweater, or because it is hot now, I'm not. But sometimes, in spite of the season weather changes, you adapt your clothing accordingly within the season of whether it is meant to be a particular kind of cloth. So I think for me it is like that. Sometimes you have to use your discernment to know how to react. Is this something to fight for, or is this something to accept and let go? Like if I have to think of, let's say, a person who is a repeat offender, who's constantly probably targeting women, and if you let that pass, he may probably do it to a lot more other ladies, and you don't want that to happen, so you would want to fight. I mean, and yet there might be a case where, you have been either robbed or cheated, and do you want to go through the whole hassle of, fighting tooth and nail for something like transitory as money, or let it just go off as a bad loss? So I think I'm putting it in a very basic manner, but for me it is like you use your discernment. Ritu, I can't take my eyes off your surroundings. It's so
Actually,
beautiful.
there's so many birds around and it's creating a lot of sound. Mm.
It's
That's
looking like
amazing.
you're
It
in a
looks so
beach
good.
shack, like
I
in
know.
a beach city, and with the sun behind you.
Yeah,
I
the
can
sun.
literally have an agenda here, become friends with Ritu and go and stay there.
Yeah.
You're welcome anytime.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's more like, having, like when you were talking, it's like we have in our kitchen all the masalas. But then for specific dishes, we use specific masalas. We don't use all of them. So it's like picking up the right thing at the right time. And then you need to be wise and
Mm.
uh, sensible as to
Yeah.
what to use when.
And
And I think
when
that,
you ask your mom, right, that what to put where, she gives us a very irritated look, right? कि वो तो पता चल ही जाता है, right? Because
mm,
for her it is just,
yeah,
like the fingers know, they just reach for that jar and it's done. So if you're specifically asking, lot of time they don't even know, but something in
mm,
them knows, right?
it's automatically. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, and with that also probably if we are more aware of what we are doing, we'll be also getting into that practice.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think the takeaway for me here is that it's not a very mental activity. Most of the activities, these decisions, I have been trained to believe that everything is mental and reason is the highest thing I can use, which is great. But I will very soon see, or I have been seeing, that reason also has its limit. And there is a greater force that is directing all that. Yeah. So when we talk about the supramental consciousness, it is superior to mental, right? The mental domain, which is the mind.
Yeah.
So just for you, I pulled up the index or whatever it is called content. So we are in section 2. So looking at oneself and others. So again, everything for myself, for others, for myself, for others. So we have done discovering a hidden treasure, turning to the coming light, defects of others, equality, goodwill, dealing with others. And now we are on the sixth one, sin, a thing not in its right place. So helping others would be the last in this section, and then we'll go on section 3. So we'll see if we want to take this further or end it here. Oh, I've gone too far. Sorry for that. Yeah. So maybe we should end here. I think next time we'll start again fresh. Maybe that would be better. So we are till now just done till here, and we'll reread that and start fresh from this. Point. Yeah, that would be better. We can. Yeah, the aspiration is not to desire for Ritu setting and focus on our own backgrounds and light within.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, jokes apart, so thanking Grace, thanking Divine for their presence, for their light, for their direction in our lives. And yeah, aspiring that these words, whatever is needed for me, these learnings can become me. and I can be one drop of poison less for myself and everyone. Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.